Welcome to the class on fiction in English. In one of our earlier classes, my colleague Dr. Shala has already talked to you about the course fiction in English, and he also covered block 3 and block 4. What we are going to do in the class today is take up the origin and development of the English novel. I have changed the slide. We are looking at the slide where we are trying to distinguish novel and short story under the broad rubric of fiction. Though your course is titled Fiction in English, when you go through the contents of your SLM or when you go through the contents of your syllabus, you will notice that we are talking only about a novel. We are not discussing any short story in the course of this particular paper or course. So let us first try to understand what we mean by fiction. Fiction is something that is opposed to non-fiction, something that is imaginary, something that is creative, something that is a figment of the imagination of the author. Broadly, fiction can be of two types, novel and short story. The word novella, novel, comes from the Italian word novella, meaning a little new thing. A short story is also like a novel, but as the term indicates, it is very short, very brief. A novel, on the other hand, is a long narrative and descriptive prose work dealing with a story, a character, not a character, a plot and a number of characters. In a story, you still have characters, there is a plot, it also revolves around something, but the whole short story is covered in a limited number of pages. It is much shorter when compared to a novel. The novel may also have a further subdivision, a long novel, a standard novel, and a short novel, which is called a novella. Tracing the origin and development of the English novel, we go to the first novelist, Daniel Defoe, who lived between probably 1659 to 1731. He wrote a number of novels basically dealing with travel. For example, in Robinson Crusoe, which is a travel narrative, very famous. You might have already come across this. You might have read it at the school or early college level, or you might have even watched the movie based on Robinson Crusoe. But before we come to Daniel Defoe, we need to take a few steps back and look at the beginnings. English novel did not emerge suddenly with Daniel Defoe. It did not emerge suddenly with Robinson Crusoe. There was something happening before 1719. And what was it that was happening before 1719 that contributed to the beginning of English novel is now visible on your screen. Way back in the 16th century, we have prose narratives being written. These prose narratives are fictional. Because they are fictional, we can treat them as the early sources of the English novel. Some of the early novelists who laid down the beginnings of the English novel are there on your screen. The names are given on the left side. The titles of one of their works, representative works each, is given in the middle. And in the end, you have the year of publication of that work. So in 1516, we have Thomas More publishing Utopia, which is a fictional prose narrative. In 1579, we have Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, which is a travel narrative. Sidney's Arcadia of 1590, Bacon's New Atlantis are very famous works which usher in the English novel. And with Thomas Nash, The Unfortunate Traveller, published in the same year as Bacon's New Atlantis, we come very close to the English novel. The Unfortunate Traveller is written in the form of a picaresque narrative. We'll read more about the picaresque as we look at the development of the English novel. But for now, what you should know about picaresque is it is a kind of a tale, a kind of a novel in which the hero is a picaro meaning a rogue. He moves from place to place, and in the course of his movement, in the course of his journey, this picaro or the rogue encounters a number of incidents. These incidents are woven together in the form of the novel referred to as the picaresque novel. So with these beginnings, we come to Daniel Defoe, who, as I told you a little while ago, is generally considered to be the first novelist in English. I have listed only 3 of his works here, along with the year of publication. These are important works, though none of these novels is prescribed for your study. As students of literature, as future teachers of English language and literature at the college and university level, as prospective students who would appear for the UGC NET JRF examination, I would advise you to read as many novels as possible in the history of English literature. So after having looked at the beginnings, let us see who the early novelists were. All the 3 novelists listed on your screen now, Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, and Goldsmith, are considered as the early English novelists. Give me 1 second, I'll take a quick look if there is some important chat message. Somebody could not hear me, but I'm sure I'm audible to everybody. Just give me a second. Yes, there is no audio disturbance from my end, as one of your friends has already said. Please check your connectivity and please ensure that you are in a soundproof room or where there is minimum external sound. Okay, so we are on the slide heading Early Novelists. Samuel Richardson wrote epistolary novels. An epistolary novel is a novel written in the form of exchange of letters. Letters are exchanged between characters in the novel, and through the exchange of these letters, an epistle is a letter, the story in the novel is unraveled to the reader. Pamela and Clarissa are 2 major novels by Samuel Richardson. Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews and Tom Jones are also very famous works. Henry Fielding specialized in writing picaresque novels. Another early novelist is Oliver Goldsmith, and one work of his reflected on your screen is The Vicar of Wakefield, published in the year 1766. Just a minute, please. Let me take you to the next slide. After having looked at the early novelists, let us look at the early women novelists. There are 3 early women novelists listed on the slide: Fanny Burney, Jane Austen, Maria Edgeworth. Of these 3, Jane Austen is more popular. You might have read some of her novels in your early college life, or you might have watched movies that are based on her novels. If you go to YouTube, you will be able to find a movie on Pride and Prejudice. And several years ago, there was a Hindi television serial, Trishna. The Hindi television serial aired in India, titled Trishna, was based on Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. If you wish, you may watch that television series also, available on YouTube. But to know the actual story of Jane Austen, please, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, please go to the novel, read it. These novels are easily available on the internet. Okay, you will hear about Maria Edgeworth in a later slide. 1 or 2 of their works are listed on their screens. For Fanny Burney, I have listed 2 novels. For Jane Austen, I have listed 3 novels. For Maria, I have given names of 2 novels by her. Another important feature in the development of the English novel is the production of the historical novel. And the person behind the historical novel is Sir Walter Scott, who lived between 1771 to 1832. Wherever I have used years in your slide presentation for the class today, I have referred to the History of English Literature by Edward Albert. So all the years being mentioned in the class today are drawn from History of English Literature by Edward Albert. It is a very useful book. You can use it to prepare for the NET examination. It is a good handbook for teachers of English literature as well, other than David Dyche's History of English Literature in 4 volumes, Louis Kazamia's History of English Literature, and other such histories of English literatures. Okay, Sir Walter Scott was greatly influenced by one of the early women novelists, Maria Edgeworth. He specialized in writing historical novels. Kenilworth is a novel by Walter Scott. Ivanhoe is a novel by Walter Scott. Ivanhoe is also a very powerful novel. You will find this as a movie as well. So please read the novel, please watch the movie. You are definitely going to like it. Now, as we move with the development of the English novel, we come to the Victorian age. The Victorian age is basically the age of the novel. We have a burst of the novels being produced during this period of time. More and more people started reading the novels. More and more authors started publishing novels, either in serial form or as one published work. On your screen, you have to the left side names of the Victorian novelists, men and women. In the middle, wherever possible, I have given the period of the author, period of the novelist, and on the extreme right of the slide, you have either one novel or more than one novel written by the particular novelist. Charles Dickens is another very famous Victorian novelist, like Jane Austen or Daniel Defoe. You might have read Charles Dickens earlier in your life. Some of the novels are mentioned on the screen: Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Hard Times, Great Expectations. These are very popular novels by Hard Times. These are social novels. These are novels depicting reality. These are novels that present the very bleak London life, the impact of industrialization. So it is not a very beautiful picture that we see emerging from the novels of Charles Dickens. There is reference to poverty, there is reference to crime and evil and difficult times in his novels. William Makepeace Thackeray, another novelist of the same period, is famous for Vanity Fair, a very voluminous novel. Emily Brondt's Wuthering Heights is prescribed for your study. I'm going to discuss this novel in the class today, a very powerful novel. In an earlier class, I showed you a video lesson prepared on Wuthering Heights by our university, where I'm talking about the character of Heathcliff, the protagonist in Wuthering Heights. So please watch that audio video lesson. It is extremely useful. Apart from that, you will find Wuthering Heights as a movie. The novel Wuthering Heights is also easily accessible. So please read the novel. It is very important that you read the novel on your own before you read what the SLM tells us about the novel. Emily Brontë and her sisters Charlotte and Anne Brontë were all novelists. If Emily Brontë became very famous with her single novel Wuthering Heights, her other sister Charlotte Brontë also acquired a lot of fame, especially with Jane Eyre. Was not so very famous. I have listed one of her works, Agnes Grey, published in 1847. If you look on your screen, you will notice all the 3 novels published by the 3 sisters are in the same year, 1847. So the family, the Brontë family, the Brontë sisters were quite busy in the year 1847. George Eliot is another famous Victorian novelist. Though the name is masculine, it is not a man. George Eliot is the pseudonym or the pen name used by a woman novelist, Marianne Evans. Despite the progress made in the English society, the society was not yet ready to accept women as novelists, women as writers of fiction. So we have George Eliot as the assumed name of Marianne Evans. She wrote more than one novel. I have listed only two of her novels, Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch. For our earlier batches, not your batch, the seniors have studied both these novels by George Eliot in different batches. Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urberville, The Mayor of Casterbridge, and his other novels are also very powerful novels representative of the Victorian age, bringing to us the rift in society because of the shift from the agrarian lifestyle to the more urban or more scientific lifestyle. So the society moving from an agricultural life to an industrial life is clearly depicted in the novels of Thomas Hardy. Before we proceed further, in fact, I will, because Wuthering Heights is a Victorian novel, I put some slides immediately here after a discussion of, excuse me, give me a second. After a discussion of the Victorian novel, I have put slides on the novel Wuthering Heights, where we talk about the plot of Wuthering Heights, the characters in Wuthering Heights, the themes in Wuthering Heights, the narrative technique in Wuthering Heights. But I'll come back to these four slides a little later. Let us continue with our discussion of the development of the English novel. After the Victorian age, novels continued to be written, and during the war years, during the period of the World War I and World War II, more and more novels were written. These novels basically dealt with British imperialism. They dealt with the situation of created in the world due to the impact of World War I and World War II. So you will have not just these two novelists, E.M. Forster and Huxley, with their novels A Passage to India or Brave New World, but several novels were written during the war years. It is war years, not WARRIORS. Please do not get confused. And when I say war years, I am talking about World War I and World War II. Then we come to the modern novel. This is what your syllabus covers from the beginning to the modern novel. Some of the modern novelists given on your screen are D.H. Lawrence. Two of his works, Sons and Lovers and The Rainbow, are mentioned there. Then we have Virginia Woolf's, again only two novels mentioned there, Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. James Joyce's Ulysses and Dubliners are mentioned there. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is again another important work by Joyce. So with this, we come to the end of the development of the English novel. The modern novel deals with the dilemma of the modern man living in a fragmented society, living in a society that has been greatly impacted by the World War, a society where people are still struggling to come to terms with themselves, a society which is still trying to seek its identity. So you find the search for the self, the search for one's identity, the sense of hopelessness, the existentialism prevailing in the world. These are all major themes or aspects around which the modern novel revolves. Having looked at the origin and the development of the English novel, let us now take some time and look at the plot of Wuthering Heights. Before I start the discussion on whether the plot in Wuthering Heights, give me a moment so I can quickly go to the chat box and see if there is something important listed. Some students are not able to hear me. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that I'm not audible to you, but the other students are able to hear me. I can do one thing. What I will do is I'll switch off the AC in my room. So if that sound is disturbing you, maybe you should be able to hear me better now. I've switched off the AC. Let's hope the audio will be more clear. Otherwise, please be a little patient, and when the recording is shared with you, I hope the recording is clear enough for you to follow it. Okay, we are back on the slide where we are looking at the plot of Wuthering Heights. What is listed on your screen is not original. I found this very interesting image on the internet. The source is given there at the bottom. It was so succinctly presented that I thought that I should use this image to talk to you about the plot or the storyline of Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights, as I told you, is a Victorian novel written by one of the Brown sisters. Some important things to remember about Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is the name of a place where the principal characters of the novel stay. Other than Wuthering Heights, there is another important location in the novel which is called Thrushcross Grange. Thrushcross. Next word Grange. So the novel Wuthering Heights revolves around Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. When the novel opens, we find the narrator, Mr. Lockwood, renting Thrushcross Grange. He is new to this place, he is new to this residence, and he wants to know more about his landlord, more about the people, and more about what is happening around there. The landlord, the present landlord, stays at Wuthering Heights. These are two neighboring buildings divided by some space. The original family living in Wuthering Heights, we have to move several years ahead in time. Wuthering Heights is actually initially owned by Mr. Earnshaw. Let me first take you to the slide on the characters, so you will be able to understand the plot better. I'll come back to the slide on plot. This may not be very clearly visible to you, so what I will do is, okay, I think this should be more clear on your screen now. We have two characters in the novel, not major characters, these are minor characters, Mr. Earnshaw and his wife, Mrs. Earnshaw. Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw own the property Wuthering Heights. They have two children, a daughter, Catherine, and a son, Henley. In the course of the novel, we are informed by one of the other narrators, Mrs. Nellie Dean, who is the housekeeper to Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, that in one of his journeys, Mr. Earnshaw found a little boy. Because he could not locate the parents of the boy, he was a gypsy boy. He is abandoned. Mr. Earnshaw fails to find his family and decides that he cannot leave this little boy out, and he brings him with him to his family at Wuthering Heights and hopes that he will be brought up along with his other two children, Catherine and Earnshaw. So in the growing years of Catherine and Hindley, we have the presence of Heathcliff. Heathcliff is the protagonist, the central character in the novel Wuthering Heights. As the novel proceeds, we find Mr. Earnshaw dying, leaving behind his property Wuthering Heights to his son Hindley. Hindley, in the meantime, had gone abroad for his studies, and when he returns married. He is now married to a woman called Frances. Hindley and Frances have a son named Hareton. So let me take you back to the family tree. Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw have two children, Catherine Earnshaw, the daughter, and Hindley Earnshaw, the son. Hindley Earnshaw gets married to Frances. Hindley Earnshaw and Frances have a son named Hareton Earnshaw. In the meantime, let us come back to Catherine. I also told you that Mr. Earnshaw brought this little boy, Heathcliff, to his family, and he now grows up along with the children, Catherine and Hindley. Hindley has spent a greater time of his life outside of the family, pursuing his education. So it is Catherine and Heathcliff who spend more time together. Because they grew up together, because they spent most of the time together, Catherine and Heathcliff end up becoming very fond of one another, and they eventually also fall in love. Now, as the story unfolds, we are taken to the family in the neighborhood. The family that originally stays at Thrushcross Grange is the family of Mr. and Mrs. Linton. On the right side of your screen, Mr. Linton, Mrs. Linton. I hope this is more visible now. So on Wuthering Heights, you have Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw staying with Catherine and Hindley, and Heathcliff also joining them. On the Thrushcross Grange property, we have Mr. Linton and Mrs. Linton staying with their children, a daughter Isabella Linton and a son Edgar Linton. As the novel proceeds, we find that Heathcliff and Catherine have come close together. They spend most of the time outside, running around, exploring the heath. In one such exploration, they go very close to Thrushcross Grange. As they are peeping from one of the windows and looking at the Linton family inside, their dog comes and attacks Heathcliff and Catherine Catherine suffers from dog bite. Because of all the hullabaloo, the Lintons come out. They take Catherine inside. Heathcliff also goes inside with her. But by his appearance, it is clear that Heathcliff does not belong to a noble family. Catherine comes from a good family. She belongs to the family of Earnshaws. So the Linton family neglects Heathcliff. In fact, they degrade him and they give good attention to Catherine. Because of the dog bite, she is not able to walk out, and she is held up in the Linton family home at Thrushcross Grange for about a period of 5 weeks. During this period of 5 weeks, Catherine becomes closer to Edgar Linton, and because she is now spending more time in civilized company, her mannerisms also change. In the past, Catherine and Heathcliff were untamed. They were like children of nature, enjoying life without any control of the parents. But the Linton family is more refined, and with the time spent in the Linton family, Catherine also becomes refined. When she finally returns to Wuthering Heights, we find that she is not as close to Heathcliff as she was in the past. We find that she is more frequently going to the Linton family, to Thrushcross Grange, and meeting Edgar Linton. There is a very famous and powerful scene in the novel where Catherine, referred to the daughter of Mr. Earnshaw, is having a talk with her housekeeper, Nellie Dean. Nellie Dean is like a governess. She has brought up Catherine. She has also taken care of Heathcliff. So for her, both are equal. So at one point of time, Nellie Dean and Catherine think they are the only ones in the kitchen, and they start talking. Heathcliff, in the meantime, is also there in the room, but neither Catherine has seen him nor Nellie Dean. Of course, halfway through, Nellie Dean does notice that Heathcliff is very much in the room because she sees him getting up and leaving the room. Now, what happens in the course of this discussion between Nellie Dean and Catherine is that there is a discussion revolving around her relationship with Edgar and with Heathcliff. Catherine is very clear. She knows that she loves Heathcliff, but at the same time, she knows that she cannot marry him. Their family background does not permit it. So she starts telling Nellie Dean that she would like to get married to Edgar Linton, and that she just cannot think of marrying Heathcliff. But this conversation continues where she also praises Heathcliff, where she says that she hopes her marriage to Edgar Linton will strengthen Heathcliff's presence in the family, because Hindley does not like Heathcliff at all. Hindley, after the death of Mr. Earnshaw, treats Heathcliff more like a person working on their farms rather than an adopted son, rather than a brother. So instead of treating Heathcliff as a brother, Hindley, the son of Earnshaw, mistreats him. And Catherine hopes that with her marriage to Edgar Linton, she will be able to give Heathcliff a better life, which is not able to get under the control of Hindley. But unfortunately for her, Heathcliff only hears part of her talk with Nellie Dean, and he's so heartbroken, he's so hurt that Catherine is planning to get married to Edgar Linton, and that she thinks that Heathcliff and she are not of the same social status, that he gets up and without Catherine even noticing it, he leaves the room. But this has been noticed by Nellie Dean. After he leaves the room, there is a very powerful statement by Catherine Earnshaw. She says, "I am Heathcliff." This is one of the most powerful statements in the novel, meaning that Catherine can never imagine life without Heathcliff. They are like one soul, one life, one person. That is so much that Heathcliff means to us. That is their love for one another. But unfortunately, Heathcliff did not remain in the room to listen to this part of Catherine's narration. He is already heartbroken and he leaves the room, and he disappears from there for several years. For a very long period of time, we don't see Heathcliff in the novel. In the meantime, Catherine Earnshaw gets married to Edgar Linton, and she gives birth to a girl who's named by her own name, Catherine, and we know her as Cathy. In the meantime, Heathcliff has been away for several years. Nobody knows where he went, what he did, but eventually he returns, and when he returns as a very wealthy man. But that remains a suspense in the novel, because even Nellie Dean cannot tell us the source of Heathcliff's wealth. What did he do? How did he come by so much wealth? Did he earn the wealth by honest means or by dishonest means? Well, whatever be the source of Heathcliff, Heathcliff is now a rich man. In the meantime, what is happening at Wuthering Heights is that Hindley, the son of Earnshaw, is now the master of the house, has lost his wife Frances. He lives a very dejected life. He starts taking more and more alcohol. He throws up all his savings and earnings, and he is hardly there to bring up Hareton the way Mr. Earnshaw would have wanted his grandson to grow up. Catherine, in the meantime, is married to Edgar Linton, and she does not stay at Wuthering Heights. She has gone off to Thrushcross Green, that is the home of Edgar Linton. When Heathcliff returns, he comes to Wuthering Heights. Hindley has been so much in debt that he cannot but welcome Heathcliff back, and we notice that gradually Heathcliff has Hindley under his complete control, and more than Hindley, it is Hindley's son Hareton who comes completely under the control of Heathcliff. In the meantime, as the story progresses, Hindley also dies. So Hareton, the son of Hindley and Frances, does not have his parents anymore. He is at Wuthering Heights, but he cannot take care of his property because his complete property is now under the care of Heathcliff, control of Heathcliff. So just as Hindley ill-treated Heathcliff, and just as Hindley did not treat Heathcliff as a part of the family, now Heathcliff's turn to take revenge. And he takes revenge by completely ill-treating Hareton, treating him worse than a servant. And we find Hareton as a very, very weak character. The child born to Edgar Linton and Catherine Earnshaw, in the meantime, is a very strong, powerful, determined, headstrong girl, complete opposite to Hareton. After his return, Heathcliff is still very much in love with Catherine. He goes a couple of times, to more than once, to Thrushcross Grange, meets her. She is very happy to see him, but Heathcliff knows that because she is married to Edgar, he cannot have her in the same relationship that he had with her in the past. Edgar, in the meantime, is not very happy to notice the way Catherine is very happy in the company of Heathcliff. Heathcliff has a very huge plan in his mind running. His love and revenge are both seen simultaneously in the novel. He now begins to seduce Isabella. She falls in love with him. They elope, they get married. Now, we would think that Heathcliff would be good to Isabella, but no, he's not good to her, because there can be only one woman in his life, and that is Catherine. His marriage to Isabella is merely to take revenge against Edgar, because Isabella's brother Edgar was as bad to Heathcliff as Catherine's brother Hindley was bad to Heathcliff. In the meantime, as the story progresses, we find that Heathcliff and Isabella have a son, Linton. He is a very weak child. Isabella also dies in the course of the novel. And now we find Heathcliff having charge of his son Linton and having charge of Hindley's son Hareton. He is at Wuthering Heights, Catherine at Thrushcross Grange, but Catherine's health deteriorates and she dies. In her last moments, Heathcliff is there with her, giving her complete support. More than the husband, it is Heathcliff who is there with Catherine in her dying moments. All these scenes in the novel are very, very powerful, scenes worth reading. So I advise you again and again to please go to the original novel, read Wuthering Heights as the original text, and you will find how powerful it is. In fact, you should read the novel before you even look at the asylum and the different units framed on Wuthering Heights. So much later in the novel, we find that now everybody seems to be in some way or the other under the control of Heathcliff, because one after the other the parents die. Heathcliff ensures that Cathy gets married to his son Linton. Cathy does not like Linton at all. She dislikes him. Linton is extremely weak. Cathy has some kind of a weakness for Hareton, but Heathcliff will not have it. He forces a marriage between Cathy and Linton. It is a loveless marriage. Eventually, Linton also dies, Heathcliff also dies, and Cathy and Hareton are shown as engaged towards the end of the novel. So this is the major background to the characters and the story. Once you have known who the characters in the story are, I think you should be able to understand the plot of the story. I will again go to the chat box and look if there is some important discussion or something that I need to know about. There is still some issue about... Yes, I know the slide is not very clear. That's okay. You will get the slide presentation anyway later on. So when you get the PPT, you will be able to zoom it and see it separately. Anyway, this is not original. I have borrowed it from a source in the internet. It just gives you the chapter-wise summary, not individual chapters, but groups of chapter summary is given. Whatever I told you now is all given there. What you need to remember about the plot of Wuthering Heights is to remember the two main places, Wuthering Heights as a location and Thrushcross Grange as a location. When the novel opens, we find that one of the narrators, Mr. Lockwood, has rented Thrushcross Grange and he has come to live there. He is a completely new person there. He is not familiar with the surroundings. He finds the landlord, Heathcliff, a very strange person. He becomes a little friendly with the housekeeper Nellie, and through asking Nellie about the family, we come to know about the rest of the story of Wuthering Heights. So this story of Wuthering Heights is narrated to us through Lockwood and through Nellie Dean in the first person narrative. You should know about the two families. At Wuthering Heights, we have the Earnshaw family, Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, their children Catherine and Hindley. Hindley gets married to Frances. They have a son, Harshaw. And in the other place, at the Thrushcross Grange, we have Mr. and Mrs. Linton, who stay with their children Isabella and Edgar. Edgar gets married to Catherine, and Isabella is married to Heathcliff. Heathcliff and Isabella have a son named Hindley. You find it very strange that the son has been named after Catherine's brother, Hindley. So it's Hindley, Heathcliff. Sorry, Linton, not Hindley. I got the name wrong. It is Linton, Linton Heathcliff. And on the other side, you have a daughter being born to Edgar and Catherine, also named Catherine. Eventually, in the novel, Heathcliff forces marriage between Linton and Catherine, but they don't seem to get along very well. It is a case of a mismatched couple. In the course of the novel, we find Heathcliff also dying, we find Linton also dying. So the two major characters from the two families left remaining are Harshaw and Cathy, and we are told towards the close of the novel that these two are engaged, and hopefully it is hoped that they will lead a happy life thereafter. So we looked at the plot and we looked at the characters. Now let us move to the themes in the novel Wuthering Heights. The major theme is the theme of love and revenge. If love is seen as an obsession in Heathcliff, his revenge is also so much powerful. He deeply loves Catherine. He appears to be a good person, very shy, very reserved, does not talk much, does not socialize much. But because from their childhood they grew up together, he took a liking to Catherine, and this liking is mutual. Both Catherine and Heathcliff like one another, they spend time with one another. They're almost of the same element. But as the novel progresses, we find that Catherine and Edgar fall in love with one another and they eventually get married. It does not mean that Catherine does not love Heathcliff anymore. She continues to love him. Her love surpasses any other love. In the meantime, Heathcliff succeeds in his plan to make Isabella fall in love with him and get married. Hindley had been away from his own home for a long time. He also falls in love with the woman Frances and comes back a married man. So there are different levels of love happening in the novel. You can also include the theme of marriage in the novel, love and revenge, love and marriage. These are themes that are important in the novel. The sense of isolation, especially as a result of abandonment, excuse me, is another important theme of the novel. When the novel opens, we are told that Heathcliff does not have parents. He is a foundling. He has been found, abandoned, and Mr. Earnshaw brings him, takes pity on him and brings him to his family at Wuthering Heights. He could not become the son that Mr. Earnshaw would have wanted Heathcliff to be. After his death, Heathcliff is treated more like a servant and ill-treated by Hindley. So there is a deep sense of isolation in which Heathcliff grows up. The only person other than Catherine that Heathcliff is close to is Nellie Dean. Then the sense of isolation is seen in Linton. Heathcliff does not like his own son. In fact, he hates his son. He does not like his son to be a weakling. He's the exact opposite of Heathcliff. The isolation that Catherine feels despite her marriage to Edgar. Her heart and soul belong to Heathcliff, and she feels like a stranger in the house of Edgar. Then we have the ownership, not just the ownership of the property. One family owning Wuthering Heights, another family owning Thrushcross Grange. When the novel opens, two different families own these two places. Wuthering Heights property is owned by the Earnshaw family. The Thrushcross Grange property is owned by the Lintons. But as the story progresses, we find that both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange come under the control of Heathcliff. Heathcliff is not the original owner of either Wuthering Heights or of Thrushcross Grange. Coming with the ownership, we also have the master-servant relationship. For Mr. Edgar, Heathcliff is not a servant, he's more like a son. Nellie also never treats Heathcliff as a servant, though she herself is a worker in the family. There is another character, Joseph, who works for the family. So we have Hindley taking on the role of a master and using control over Heathcliff to degrade him. The Linton family also follows this master-servant relationship and looks down upon Heathcliff and does not consider him an equal. On his part, Heathcliff ill-treats his own son, Catherine's daughter, and Hindley's son. We find him treating everybody worse than servants. There is a theme of materialism running in the novel. Money, wealth, possessions are important to some characters. Catherine decides to get married to Edgar because somewhere she knows that Heathcliff will not be able to provide to her the kind of comfortable life that she is used to. So getting married to Edgar would ensure that she has a good financial stability in her married life. Hindley also loves wealth, but he could not hold back to his wealth, and he loses it all and faces poverty. Heathcliff starts from the levels of poverty and reaches great heights of success and power, becoming owner of two big properties. Very close to the theme of love, revenge, and marriage is the theme of obsession. Heathcliff's obsession is astounding. It is something that is not easy to explain in words. It is something that we need to feel. It is something that we need to experience as we read the novel. Very, very powerful feelings of obsession that one finds in Heathcliff. One second. I was discussing, in fact, all the characters. I talked about Heathcliff, I talked about the Lintons, I talked about the Earnshaws, I talked about Hindley, I talked about the senior Catherine, the junior Catherine, Linton and Hershaw. Almost all the characters have been covered in the course of the class today. Okay, we will give one quick look at the narrative technique. The whole of the story comes to us basically through these two narrators, Mr. Lockwood, who is a tenant who has come for a short stay at Thrushcross Grange. Soon after his arrival at Thrushcross Grange, he goes to meet his landlord at Wuthering Heights, but then the weather turns stormy and he cannot go back to Thrushcross Grange. When he stays overnight there, not only does he witness Heathcliff, Linton, Catherine, and Hershaw together, and finds it difficult to understand what kind of a family is it. He does not know who Catherine is married to. She is too young to be married to Heathcliff. Linton is too weak for Lockwood to guess that he could be her husband, which in fact he is. So during that stay at Wuthering Heights, Lockwood's interest in Wuthering Heights and in Heathcliff and the other characters increases, and then he falls sick, Nellie Deans takes care of him. And when he asks Nellie Deans about this family, Nellie Dean tells us the whole story of Heathcliff being found, about the two families, and everything else that we know. So these two characters play a very important role in unraveling the story to us. But these are stories not from a third-person omniscient point of view. There are limitations because they tell the story only as much as they can be a part of the story, only as much as they can witness the story. That is why we are never told what happened to Heathcliff after he went away from Wuthering Heights. What was happening in his life for about 3 years' time when he was away from Wuthering Heights. These are mysteries that will remain. And a very gothic presence to the novel is given early on when Lockwood is given the room of Catherine to stay overnight, and he finds it very, very strange. What he hears, what he sees are very powerful things which take us to very, very important aspects of the novel. Heathcliff's obsession with Catherine is so great that at one point of time he tells Nellie that his love for Catherine is so great and that he missed her so much that he went to her grave after her death and laid down next to her. This is extremely morbid, very, very gothic. It's very difficult to understand. How could a person go dig up the grave of his once beloved woman and lie down next to her in the grave? It is like Heathcliff yearning for death to come and yearning to die along with Catherine. He does not want to be separated from Catherine even in death. Such is the powerful feeling that we find in the course of the novel. Apart from that, we are also told that at one point Nellie Dean finds him staring, and he's just looking. He seems to be looking at the wall, but then it is noted that he's not actually looking at the wall ahead. He's looking at something between the wall and himself. And this probably is Catherine, the ghost of Catherine that keeps coming here again and again because of her love for Heathcliff perhaps, or because Heathcliff is so obsessed in his love that he cannot stop thinking about her. So with this, we stop our discussion on Wuthering Heights. I hope you got some good idea about Wuthering Heights, about the development of the English novel, about the beginnings of the English novel with early prose narratives taking as far back as Bacon, as Sidney's Arcadia, as Thomas Nash's The Unfortunate Traveller. Then we look at how Daniel Defoe is considered to be the first novelist. Let me quickly go through the slides. We talked about some of the novels by Daniel Defoe, the kind of travel narratives written by him. For the early period, we looked at 4 or 5 prose writers who wrote in the form of fiction. We discussed the early novelists, both men and women. We talked about Richardson, Henry Fielding, we talked about Jane Austen, we talked about Maria Edgeworth. And when we moved to the historical novel, we talked about the contribution of Sir Walter Scott. Then with the Victorian novel, we talked about several novelists, all of them very famous in their own right: Dickens, Thackeray, Emily Bronte. The prescribed novel Wuthering Heights is by Emily Bronte. Then we also talked about Hardy. We also talked about how the Victorian novel also is often representative of its society. It presents to us the break between the agricultural life and the industrial life. It shows to us the shift from the agrarian to the industrial. It talks about the difficult life that people were leading because of poverty, because of various socio-political conditions, prevalent conditions. From there, we went on to talk about the novel during the First World War and the Second World War. We talked about how the writers during this period were greatly influenced by the war, and we find these things being reflected in the writings apart from themes of British imperialism and colonialism. From here we move to the modern novel. This is where your syllabus on the origin and development of the English novel ends. We looked at some representative modern novelists, and we also talked about the main features of the modern novel. Then from there we had a discussion on Emily Bronn's Wuthering Heights. We looked at the plot, we looked at the characters in the novel, we talked about the themes, we talked about the narrative technique. So with this, I hope you should be able to get a good idea of what the novel is all about. In the class tomorrow, we shall continue with a discussion on another novel, which is titled The Outsider.